Hey there, I'm Jamie Beckett, AOPA Foundation Ambassador in Florida and a great friend and fan of MzeroA.com. Hey, I'm here to talk to you today about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I'll bet it's near and dear to yours too. In fact, I think it might be the dream of every pilot. We're going to talk about how to buy an airplane. Part 1. Buying an airplane really is one of the great dreams that pilots have even before they start flight training. The idea of having the freedom of being able to get into an aircraft that you own, take off wherever you are, go wherever you want to go, that amount of liberty is just intoxicating. Good word, don't you think? Look, you probably can own an airplane, but it requires some thought and some planning. It's a big purchase. It's more than a car very often, although it may cost what a motorcycle costs. There's a huge spectrum from just a few $1,000s up to millions. So let's take a look at what it would take for you to buy an airplane that works for you. And that's important because the airplane that's perfect for you may not be the airplane that's perfect for me, and it's probably not the airplane that's perfect for Jason. So let's talk about it. First, a little personal history. The first airplane I wanted to buy was a Taylorcraft, a little BC-12D. It was sitting on the side of the main building in Meriden-Markham Airport in Meriden, Connecticut, where I was a flight instructor. Now, this is more than 30 years ago. It was one of the ugliest airplanes I'd ever seen, but the owner only wanted $7,000. And I knew this because there was a piece of cardboard in the window that said, "For sale, $7,000. I'd never bought an airplane. I was a flight instructor, but I'd never actually paid to buy the airplane and do the maintenance, and I didn't really know a lot about what was under the skin back in those days. That's important because I was very fortunate that I didn't have $7,000. As a matter of fact, I was frustrated about it. I looked around for other opportunities. Were there any people I could partner with and cut that price down to $3,500 so we each owned half? Well, fortunately, I wasn't able to do that because what I know now, and I didn't know then, was that airplane had been sitting outside for years. The fabric was undoubtedly no good, and replacing the fabric on an aircraft can be a very expensive item. It may be something you could do yourself with the oversight of an IA, but the odds are that's not something a first-time buyer wants to get into. It's also entirely likely that the steel tubing underneath that fabric had rotted out and would require major repair, and that's to say nothing of the fact the engine hadn't turned a blade in years. So being stored outside, the weather, the snow, the rain, all that, I probably got away cheap because I didn't have the $7,000 to buy that airplane. Now fast forward a number of years and I'm still looking for an airplane. I still haven't gotten one. I've bought the house, I've had the kids, I've done all that life experience stuff, but I still haven't gotten the airplane. And then I'm at the airport one day at the FBO, and they move a display case, and right there on the wall is an ad for a 1963 Cessna 150C model. Perfect. Two-seat, time builder, very inexpensive to operate. It's got new plexiglass, it's got a new prop. The downside, it hasn't actually flown in 5 years. Well, I called up the owner and I made arrangements to see the airplane and we had a great chat. It turned out he had bought the airplane, then bought a house and realized he really couldn't afford to manage both of them. But he only printed up that one flyer and put it on the wall at the FBO. He didn't let anybody else know, just that one flyer. And just bad luck, somebody moved a display case in front of it and nobody saw that flyer for 5 years until I just happened to be there the day they moved the display case. Now, because he'd been sitting there for 5 years waiting and because the engine hadn't turned over, there's a pretty good chance there's going to be some work required. There may be some corrosion in there. I made a stupid lowball offer. He was asking $20,000, I offered 10. He countered with 11 and we had a deal. I took home my first airplane, a 1963 Cessna 150 C model. Fastback, straight tail. Actually a great airplane. I enjoyed flying a lot. I put it into a flying club that I belonged to at the time. Plenty of people flew it. Some students soloed in it. It's still in a flight school out there in the world someplace. It's still a great airplane, and it will be for years to come, I have no doubt. Now, after that 150, I decided I needed a little more space, a little more capacity, a little longer legs, and I did look around, and I just stumbled onto a Cessna 172. Happened to be in the hangar home next door to where a friend of mine lived. I was just visiting, and we went wandering over, and the guy offered me a great price. Now, it had a very high time engine, and it had a classic 1977 instrument panel, including a Lorian and a cassette deck. It was pretty old school, but it did what I needed it to do. And many times when we're shopping for an airplane, that's the important part. Beyond the price and the condition, is this plane going to do what you want it to do? Mission is very important with aircraft. If I buy a Cessna 150 because I want to take my family from Florida to Colorado, I've made a big mistake because they're not going to fit in there. That's going to be a very disappointing experience. On the other hand, I don't really want to buy a twin-engine Cessna 310 or a Beech 18 if all I really wanted to do was build time. So I need to find the airplane that fits about 80% of the mission I want to do. Let's figure out if we're looking for a time builder, something we can fly recreationally with friends, go for the $100 hamburger. Are we looking for a tail dragger where we can go do backcountry flying and camp out? Or do we want something that'll do aerobatics? We have to figure out what we're really going to do with that airplane, not what we're dreaming of, what we're actually going to do with that airplane, and find that suitable airframe and engine combination. Keep in mind, to this point, nobody has developed an airplane that carries a lot of weight, flies really high, really fast, and doesn't burn much fuel. Everything is a compromise. So let's figure out what it is we want. Take that time to make that decision, and then start looking for an airplane in that realm. Whatever it is, that'll be the right one for you. Now, let's talk a little bit about paperwork, because there will be paperwork when you buy an aircraft. Not nearly as much as you think, however. In fact, the FAA only requires 2 pieces of paper and a $5 fee to register an airplane. What you'll want to get, and you can pick this up online, you can search for it and print it out yourself, Form 8050-1, 8050-1, that is the FAA registration application. You can use either phrase, and be cautious, by the way. There are websites out there that look like they're an FAA website, and they'll charge you. This is a free download. You can just have it and print it out, print as many copies as you want. You'll also need the official bill of sale, Form 8050-2. Now, those are the only 2 documents you're going to need. The bill of sale is the seller telling the FAA, yeah, I'm getting rid of this aircraft, I'm transferring it to this other person, this other entity. The registration application is you telling the FAA, I'm the person that's buying this and it's going to be registered in my name, and I'm paying the $5 fee to make that happen. That's all that's required. Now, there's a weird little thing that you might want to consider before you get into that, because in all honesty, while I've owned this, I'm buying my 8th airplane right now, a 1966 172G model. Now, that sounds like an old antiquated airplane, but it's been upgraded from its original 150 horsepower Continental 0300 to a Lycoming 0360 with 180 horsepower, and it only has 18 hours on it. It's also got a glass panel. This airplane looks nothing like it was when it left the factory, so we really have a very wide spectrum of seeing what we've got out there. You're going to want to make sure you get that paperwork done after you find the airplane you want, as I have, and you're going to want to consider the possibility of a buyer's agreement. Now, that's not a requirement. You don't have to do it. The FAA doesn't record it. They don't even want you to send it to them. But there are times where the buyer and the seller decide they want an agreement about the purchase of this aircraft. I did that once with a 182 I bought, Cessna 182, where the seller wanted a purchase agreement because they were able to list then specifically what instrumentation was in the aircraft, what accessories came with the aircraft, like a tow bar, the condition of the aircraft, and even put in there it's sold as is, where is, which means in this case, it was in Texas, I was in Florida. I'm gonna have to make arrangements to pick that airplane up because they're not gonna deliver it. That can be in a buyer's agreement, and as I said, it's totally optional. You don't have to do that. I've only done it once. The other 7 airplanes, it hasn't been necessary, but that's something you may want to consider. You may also want to consider working with a local lawyer and or a CPA. Now that might seem like overkill to you, but it also might be smart. An aircraft can be a very expensive purchase, or it can be very affordable. Either way, you want to think about some other considerations that might leap to mind while you're excited about searching for this phenomenal freedom machine. One of those is liability. Of the 8 airplanes, well, 7 airplanes I'm buying, I've only owned 2 in my name. The others were all owned in an LLC. LLC means Limited Liability Corporation, and it does exactly that. It limits the liability you carry for owning that asset. Let me give you an example. If I lend my airplane to someone and they go off and something bad happens, America is a litigious place. There will probably be lawsuits. If I own that aircraft in my name, pretty much everything I own is on the line. All those people suing me can go after whatever I have. However, if I own that aircraft in an LLC, they can only go after the assets of the LLC, which was the aircraft and the insurance policy. They can't come after anything I personally own. So you might want to consider that. It's very easy to do. It's relatively affordable, but there may be tax consequences and there may be some things in your state that are a little different than they are in my state. So it's worth a little bit of an investment up front to work with a lawyer and a CPA to make sure you've done this correctly. One of the other things you'll want to know if you go the LLC route, when you fill out your registration application for the FAA, Form 8050-1, it will actually ask you if the organization is an American citizen. I'm just an individual and I own an LLC just as an individual. That makes the LLC an American citizen. You don't want to check the box that says corporation with a voting trust. There's an extra line in there. It can be, even though it's a one-page form, it can be a little more confusing than you think. So don't take this advice lightly. If you have the option of working with a lawyer or a CPA to make sure you set up the entity that purchases this airplane correctly, go ahead and do that. It really can be beneficial. So let's take a good look at the first few steps. Before we go shopping, we want to think about what do we want this airplane to do? And shop for an airplane that does that, including fitting our budget. We want to download and print out Form 8050-1 and 8050-2, the FAA registration application and the FAA bill of sale. And we want to have those on hand. By the way, when you send one set off to the FAA, make sure you fill out a second set and keep it for your own records. That second registration application is your temporary registration until you get the official registration back from the FAA. And it also means if somewhere down the road, the FAA kicks that documentation back because you checked the wrong box or forgot to sign something, you've got something to refer to and you know what you wrote on the original document. That's pretty much the basics. Besides going ahead and finding a lawyer, and you can talk to folks around the airport. Who do you use? Who advises you? How did you buy your airplane? Now come back later and we're going to talk about parts 2, 3, and 4 of how to buy an airplane, because there's an awful lot to go through here and it's really worth doing. So come on back and see me. We'll do this. And MzeroA Nation, keep in mind, a good pilot is always learning.